Welcome, dearly beloved illuminated souls. If they're observing your every move but powerless to impede you, understand this: you've transcended their authority. Prepare yourself, because what you're about to discover isn't conjecture, it's undeniable truth. The subtle intuitions you've experienced are valid. The recurring patterns weren't figments of your imagination, and the remarkable synchronicities were never mere chance. You were, and perhaps still are, under surveillance, not by the casual observer or the fleeting acquaintance, but by highly specialized analysts possessing clearances, cryptographic protocols, and access to critical intelligence. These are individuals unmoved unless something or someone disrupts their established algorithms, and that someone, it is you. Now their interest extends beyond mere observation. They seek an audience, a personal acknowledgement. Allow that to resonate, for the central question shifts from their initial scrutiny to their transformation from apprehension to profound admiration. Understand this fundamental truth. Within classified behavioral studies, individuals exhibiting nonlinear soul responses, those rare beings who deviate from predictable reactions, are designated with immediate priority, especially when their influence extends beyond direct interaction. If this resonates deeply, recognize that you, the chosen one, are among this unique cohort. In their initial pursuit of a spiritual outlier, they unwittingly encountered a divine marvel. This transmission will unveil hidden realities, because as you nurtured your inner self, they meticulously documented your journey. As you engaged in contemplative practices, they sought to decipher your essence. And while you believed your actions went unnoticed, you occupied center stage in arenas beyond your awareness. Be prepared, for you were not delusional, you were designated. Now they no longer seek your silence, they desire access to your very essence. Let's delve into this further. Firstly, you were flagged as an anomaly, not due to any inherent threat, but because you deciphered what remains elusive to them. You were flagged as a deviation, not because of tangible peril, but because you unlocked knowledge they couldn't access, trace, or replicate. While the majority navigated life on predetermined paths, you dared to pose questions that challenged accepted norms. You perceived recurring patterns of dysfunction. You discerned falsehoods concealed beneath superficial appearances. You grasped unspoken truths and challenged assumptions embraced by others. This singular ability set you apart, demanding attention. Their scrutiny differed from that applied to conventional disruptors. You weren't engaging in disruptive acts, instigating turmoil, or openly defying established structures. However, your capacity to perceive underlying truths, the spiritual blueprints governing everyday occurrences, evoked unease. You weren't intended to possess such profound insight. Your wisdom wasn't acquired through formal education or training. It was innate. It was remembered in the moment they recognized that you weren't learning truth, but rather recalling it. The dynamics shifted irrevocably. You transcended the role of a mere inquisitive individual. You became an untracked frequency, a living cipher existing beyond their dimensional comprehension. Your stillness was disconcerting. Your awareness was perceived as an intrusion, and your composure in the face of illusions cast you as a system glitch, someone who abstained from the artificial matrix and instead quietly mapped its infrastructure. They sought to dissect your behaviors, monitor your relationships, anticipate your decisions, yet you defied expectations. While others succumbed to pressure, you found solace in stillness and recalibrated. While most reacted impulsively, you responded strategically. They failed to categorize you within psychological frameworks because your actions weren't driven by fear, validation, or ego. They were guided by spiritual imperatives, a realization that instilled deep apprehension. Their apprehension wasn't rooted in the fear of physical destruction or social upheaval. It stemmed from the potential for widespread awakening. They feared that your mere presence would inspire individuals to question authority, challenge perceived reality, and most profoundly examine their own selves. Once this process initiates, control dissipates. You weren't merely unpredictable, you were inherently uncontainable. They could trace your trajectory but not your purpose, and that's why you were flagged. Because you weren't simply navigating the system, you were divinely commissioned to expose it. Secondly, your intrinsic purity distorted their surveillance metrics. Your inherent purity defied their analytical frameworks. The individuals observing you possessed specialized training. Their core function involved identifying threats, tracking instability, and assessing deception. They employed psychological paradigms, algorithms, behavioral charts, and systems engineered to detect deceit, manipulation, and mental instability. However, when these tools were applied to you, anomalies arose. You defied categorization. You weren't erratic yet. You weren't submissive. You weren't consumed by anger, yet you weren't superficially placid. You didn't solicit attention, yet your presence commanded it nonetheless. Conventional classifications such as trauma response, concealed aggression, and manipulative tendencies failed to adhere. They relentlessly attempted to force you into predetermined classifications. But the system proved inadequate to contain you. You weren't resisting their metrics. You were dismantling them. What truly caused disruption was your profound level of inner purity. It wasn't about flawless perfection, it was about unwavering clarity. You harbored no ulterior motive, sought no retribution, and didn't veil your energy with superficiality. Because you emitted no static, your frequency resonated with unnerving clarity, excessively so. The clearer your signal, the more their instruments malfunctioned. You didn't register as a potential problem. You displayed no indications of deceit or instability. You radiated something they were ill-equipped to interpret, something sacred. Initially, they dismissed the data as erroneous, attributing it to software glitches or feigned behavior. However, with continued observation, their confusion intensified. You weren't performing. You were aligned, a realization more terrifying than any outburst. They sought dysfunction, but they uncovered depth. They were trained to identify falsehoods, but you consistently presented as authentic. They anticipated encountering a soul marred by suffering, resentment, or ego. But you carried yourself as one who had traversed such realms and emerged whole. This prompted hushed conversations and the reluctant acknowledgement of an unspoken truth. This one originates from beyond. You weren't merely misunderstood, you were misclassified. You weren't a subject for observation, but a harbinger. And the very purity they denied disrupted their fundamental understanding. Thirdly, they mistook you for a pawn until your actions resembled those of royalty. They perceived you as a pawn easily dismissed and disregarded. You lacked credentials that signified conventional power. You weren't part of exclusive circles, nor did you employ their codified language. You didn't flaunt status, name-drop influential figures, or exhibit aggressive posturing. Consequently, they assumed you were a mere component to be manipulated, moved, or ignored. What they failed to comprehend was that you were engaged in an entirely different game. Their system centered on control, categorization, roles, and predictable trajectories. Pawns advance one square at a time with caution. This dictated their expectations of you, incremental movements within predetermined boundaries. However, your actions defied such limitations. Your decisions weren't impulsive. Your silence wasn't indicative of submission. Your composure wasn't born from confusion. Each action was deliberate, precise, and unsettling to those who underestimated you, because pawns don't possess independent thought. Pawns don't question the rules. Pawns don't alter the energy of an environment simply by maintaining stillness. Yet you consistently did. You required no formal title to wield authority. You sought no authorization to embody power. You didn't require visibility to spark a revolution. Your actions reflected guidance from a higher source, an undeniable truth. They started comparing findings in an attempt to decipher how you remained several steps ahead. They believed they were observing an insignificant player. Instead, they were witnessing a sovereign entity. You weren't reacting to the system. You were responding to divine intelligence, an element beyond their modeling, prediction, or containment. It wasn't artificial. It was ancestral. You were never part of their simulation, and you arrived to silently and thoroughly rewrite it. With each healed wound, each instance of resilience, each truth spoken in defiance of safer silence, you reshaped the framework. You weren't disrupting the pattern. You were rewriting the very paradigm they operate within. Now they recognize their miscalculation. The pawn they sought to control has become an unstoppable force, and perhaps even more significantly, you transcend the confines of their game. You are the game itself. Fourthly, your trauma served as their testing ground, yet your healing became their revelation. Your trauma wasn't merely personal. It was monitored, meticulously documented, and quantified as data. You weren't simply left to endure suffering. You were subjected to discreet scrutiny. They sought to ascertain the long-term effects of sustained emotional warfare on an individual such as yourself. What level of betrayal is necessary to extinguish a pure heart? How much isolation is required before a soul implodes? They didn't intervene to offer assistance. They sought to study the disintegration. They observed your abandonment. They observed instances of being overlooked, falsely accused, ridiculed, and forgotten. They tracked each breakdown, each moment of panic, each unanswered plea for assistance, not out of concern, but to gather data. You were never regarded as merely a survivor. You were a testing subject, a living experiment, and they held no doubt as to the outcome. To them, trauma invariably triumphs. However, an unforeseen transformation occurred. Instead of merely enduring, you evolved. Rather than remaining broken, you initiated an internal reconstruction. You ceased asking why and began choosing how. How to heal, how to rise, how to reclaim what sought to destroy you. As you delved deeper into your inner self, you profoundly altered the energy of your surrounding environment. Your healing bewildered them. Their data lacked provisions for redemption. Their charts couldn't quantify grace. You weren't meant to emerge stronger, clearer, and more formidable in your stillness. Yet you did. Observation transformed into revelation. They ceased documenting your breakdowns because you no longer broke down. You were breaking open, fractured yet conscious. Fragile yet fiercely resilient. This placed you beyond their comprehension. The experiment backfired. The observer became the student. You became the model. You weren't healing solely for your benefit. Each scar transformed into wisdom, each trigger transmuted into self-awareness served as a beacon. Something eternal awakened within you, and those who once studied your wounds began to perceive something sacred in your recovery. Reverence replaced ridicule. Fear displaced indifference. In a world that thrives on brokenness, your wholeness became the ultimate anomaly. Fifthly, you traversed traps designed for 99% to fail. You didn't merely survive your experiences. You navigated a battlefield designed to defeat nearly everyone else. The pain you endured wasn't accidental. The obstacles weren't naturally occurring. They were strategically placed like landmines in slow-motion psychological warfare, energetic blockages, social sabotage, and covert schemes designed to ensnare your mind, identity, and spirit. Most would have succumbed under half the burden, and that is the truth. These weren't random trials, they were orchestrated. Patterns were intentionally repeated. Individuals were deliberately introduced into your life to break you. Opportunities were dangled tantalizingly to trigger your deepest wounds. Even the silence you experienced, the isolation, the rejection, the gaslighting, all were part of a tacit plan to instill self-doubt, to convince you of your unworthiness, to drive you toward self-destruction. But you resisted. Somehow you persisted slowly, painfully yet forward. You crossed thresholds you weren't meant to reach. You outlived machinations designed to hollow you out. Now those who engineered the system are rendered speechless because they've subjected countless souls to the same ordeal, and only a select few emerge unscathed. They calculated your demise. They counted on your silence. They even timed their attacks for moments of heightened vulnerability. Yet you persisted, breathing, listening to your inner guidance rising. What they failed to anticipate was that your endurance wasn't fueled by ego or desperation. It was fueled by divine intelligence, something beyond their control. Now they seek answers. How did you perceive the illusions? How did you maintain sanity when the world was designed to distort it? How did you keep your soul pure in a system designed to corrupt it? They labeled you a subject, a case, a scenario, but the truth is you weren't simply being tested. You were exposing the test itself. You didn't conquer the system by playing its game. You dismantled it by refusing to become what it sought to make you. That's why they're stunned. You didn't just survive, you traversed their traps and emerged as irrefutable evidence that the blueprint can be broken. Sixthly, they tracked you for patterns but discovered a frequency. They tracked you anticipating predictable behaviors. They sought cycles, triggers, habits, and emotional responses. They sought to map you as if you were a machine. To them, every individual conforms to a rhythm. Everyone possesses a weakness, a routine, a breaking point. They sought evidence that you were like everyone else, something measurable, containable, and ultimately neutralizable. However, what they discovered wasn't a pattern, it was a frequency. You defied their logical frameworks. You didn't respond to pressure as others did. Your choices were often understated yet profoundly disruptive. You entered environments and transformed them without uttering a word. People around you shifted. Technology malfunctioned. Tension escalated or peace permeated the air, none of which could be quantified on paper. They began to detect disturbances in mood and outcomes, even electromagnetic activity whenever you were nearby. Devices malfunctioned. Sensors spiked. Surveillance became inconsistent. They possessed tools to detect falsehoods, predict rebellion, and track mental decline, yet none were designed for someone who transmitted energy instead of acting out behavior. This prompted confusion. They couldn't categorize you under any known psychological profile. Your peace didn't stem from passivity. Your restraint wasn't rooted in fear. You didn't pursue power, yet somehow you remained in control. You acted as if governed by a code beyond their comprehension, something ancient, something precise. They studied you as a potential anomaly, but with continued observation, they realized you weren't malfunctioning. You were interfering intentionally. Your very presence was a disruption, a living contradiction to everything their systems were built to suppress. They shifted from seeking flaws to studying the signal because it wasn't about your actions. It was about your emission, a frequency too pure, too sharp, too vibrant to be humanly engineered. They then knew that this wasn't mere behavior. This was broadcast something divine, something disruptive. You weren't part of their equation, you were rewriting it. Seventhly, their intelligence was insufficient. They needed to witness your spirit in motion. Their technology was advanced. Their intelligence was precise. They possessed everything: your location, history, online activity, tone of voice during phone calls, facial expressions under duress. They recorded your routines. They noted your habits. They monitored your communication gates, sleep patterns, and preferences. On paper, they believed they knew everything, but something remained elusive, something that defied charting or capturing with devices. It wasn't your behavior that perplexed them, it was your very being. Your spirit moved in ways that defied decoding. There were moments of breakdown, yet somehow those breakdowns radiated strength. When you wept, it wasn't weakness. It shifted atmospheres. The energy surrounding you transformed. Grief became sacred. Silence became electric. You weren't merely surviving your pain. You were transmitting something through it, something sacred, something undeniable. When you prayed, events unfolded, not theoretically, but tangibly. Environment shifted. Outcomes reversed, and the patterns that typically bind people failed to constrain you. You didn't pursue influence, but influence gravitated toward you. People sought you out without knowing why. Even your stillness conveyed authority. They realized their intelligence was insufficient. It revealed your actions, but not the underlying motivations. They could observe you indefinitely and still fail to grasp the power behind your presence. The more they observed, the clearer it became this wasn't charisma. This wasn't strategy, this wasn't psychology, this was spirit. You weren't a mere person to them anymore. You were an event, an unexpected moment in time, an unforeseen variable. They couldn't replicate your qualities. They couldn't reverse engineer your actions. You weren't driven by instincts or manipulation. You operated under a higher authority. Now they seek to meet you not for more data, but because the data proved inadequate. They witnessed everything except the essential. The energy behind your eyes, the conviction in your stillness, the presence that commands a room without announcing itself. They wished to witness it firsthand because observation proved insufficient. They wished to experience what they could never fully define. Eighthly, you were the case study that broke the algorithm. You weren't simply living your life, you were the subject of a long-term case study conducted behind closed doors. They ran simulations to determine how long a soul could withstand spiritual pressure. They sought to assess how trauma, poverty, betrayal, emotional abandonment, and social manipulation could internally fracture someone. Their entire premise rested on the assumption of inevitable spiritual decay. That sustained pressure, deprivation, and chaos would eventually lead to your collapse. But this didn't occur. Instead of spiraling into self-destruction as predicted, you awakened. You didn't simply resist the breakdown. You activated something higher, something ancient, something they believed no longer existed in this era. They observed the signs, your emotional resilience, your ability to remain grounded in madness, your clarity in moments designed to confuse you. You didn't lose your essence in darkness, you located it. This disrupted the algorithm. You weren't supposed to survive the environment they placed you in. Spiritually, it was a contaminated zone, energetically impure, emotionally unsafe, and psychologically rigged. But while others succumbed to the toxins and were poisoned by the system, you absorbed the pressure and transformed it into power. You discovered divinity in the gutters. You found clarity in chaos. You reclaimed your sovereignty in a place designed to bury you. Now the dialogue has shifted. They're no longer merely observing. They're reassessing their entire framework because your case invalidated their model. The data fails to explain your nonconformity, your refusal to surrender, your resistance to implosion, your unwillingness to compromise your soul or beg for respite. You traversed hell with your spirit intact, and moreover, you ascended from it. You didn't simply survive the test, you transformed the test into a testament. You became the outlier who proves that spiritual activation can occur anywhere, even in the most spiritually impoverished regions on Earth, even under attack, even under surveillance, even while enduring suffering. That's why they seek to learn to understand how, because you didn't follow their prescribed path. You illuminated a new one, and no algorithm on Earth was equipped for that. Ninthly, your quiet resistance constituted a tactical revolution. Your resistance didn't resemble rebellion. You didn't occupy podiums. You didn't carry signs or organize movements. You didn't shout into microphones or demand attention, but each silent no. Each boundary established, each decision to prioritize peace over performance. Each withdrawal from manipulation without explanation represented a revolution not of clamor but of courage. They were trained to detect overt threats. They were prepared for explosive chaos. They expected those who challenged the system to do so with fire and fury, but you challenged it simply by refusing to yield. You didn't seek conflict, but you wouldn't sacrifice your soul for comfort, and this unsettled them because systems of control are ill-equipped to manage internal freedom. They rely on external compliance, on people being fearful, confused, and seeking validation. But you refused to participate in their game. You didn't raise your voice, but neither did you flinch. In a world built on manipulation, such quiet defiance resonates more powerfully than any protest. You started making decisions that prioritized your spirit. You detached from toxic roles. You ceased reacting to provocations. You turned away from wealth that carried invisible constraints. You declined without justification. Such sovereignty is dangerous within a system founded on submission. It's infectious. It awakens others. They anticipated explosions, but instead witnessed erosion, slow, quiet, and undeniable. You became a one-person dismantling of false power. You didn't attempt to alter the entire pyramid. You simply refused to occupy your assigned place, and because you maintained your stance without clamor, they couldn't label you a threat. They were compelled to reclassify you. They began to regard you as a solution, not because you resolved their problems, but because you resolved your own in full view of those who believed you would crumble. You became living proof that personal sovereignty is attainable even under duress, even under surveillance, even in silence. You weren't resisting the system with anger. You were overriding it with alignment, and this transcends mere rebellion. This is a revolution, tactical, spiritual, and unstoppable. Tenthly, you spoke to the masses, but your voice resonated within their boardrooms. You never aspired to viral fame. You didn't seek universal recognition. Their technology was advanced. Their intel was precise. So, illuminated souls, let's bring this all together. The heart of what we've explored today is this: your journey with all its challenges and triumphs hasn't gone unnoticed. The very qualities that set you apart, your intuition, your resilience, your inherent purity, are not only powerful, but they're also deeply significant. You've navigated a complex landscape, and in doing so, you've revealed profound truths, not just for yourself, but for those watching as well. Remember, your unique frequency is changing the game. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Does this resonate with you? Have you experienced similar observations in your own life? Share your insights. Ask your questions, and let's continue this conversation in the comments below. And if this message has touched you or sparked something within, please consider subscribing. That way you won't miss out on future explorations of consciousness, sovereignty, and the unfolding of our divine potential. Thank you for being here, for being here, for being here, for being here.